Thank you very much, everyone. We're very moved to be the first of your series and the first in this new space. It's very exciting. Thanks for the invitation to speak in this Big Ideas series, and thanks to Contemporary Art Forum Kitchener and to Musa Geddes again for your support, and Alyssa, Sean, Danica, thank you in particular. We are Deirdre, Logue, and Allyson Mitchell. We are lovers. We are co-facilitators and co-conspirators at the FAG Feminist Art Gallery. Our geographical footprint is located in Toronto, in Parkdale in particular. Tonight we introduce you to some of FAG's politics and organizing principles, as well as highlight our activities and some of the inconsistencies in the process of our first 2 years as organizers of FAG.
And the moving slideshow that you see behind us is a collage of images from those first 2 years. And that includes, you're going to see pictures of people, even people who are here in this room today or this evening. You'll see pictures of gatherings, art documentation, activist demos, and sinks full of dirty dishes, because running the FAG requires lots of hospitality. And in the slideshow, you're going to see these can't, won't mantra banners that we created for FAG. And they say, we can't compete, we won't compete, we can't keep up, we won't keep down. And this is where we say, due to the following circumstances, and this is where we would list umpteen statistics about how gender, race, selective homophobia, and class operate in the art world, that we would propose these slogans and ask the following questions. Why would you want to be a winner in this hierarchical structure? And how do we both resist and reconcile our participation in this oppressive system of institutions, commerce, fame, and vocation? So can't, won't is an acknowledgement of the dilemmas of feminist and queer cultural production and participation, and it describes this all too familiar push-pull that's about working across different discourses and converging dialogues in institutions and outside of institutions.
As you can see, the Feminist Art Gallery is 450 square feet in a garage building that we built in our backyard to house our studio practice and a gallery space. When we first began, we said we would aim for about 3 exhibitions a year. In our first year and a half, we actually facilitated over 40 exhibitions and a myriad of other activities in the gallery, garage, and studio proper, in various satellite locations such as the Tate Modern, the Gladstone Hotel, Access Gallery in Vancouver, at Concordia University, in our kitchen, in our living room, and on the airwaves. We find that the gap between the artist's studio and the public is vast. Closing the gap between production and presentation creates a bond between artist and audience. At FAG, we're looking for these bonds and connections and the ways that the common, both real and imagined, can help art feel more comfortable and relevant, where artists are more visible and present. So, in many ways, we are a traditional gallery space. We have walls and we sometimes hang things on them. People come to look at the work in sort of some traditional ways as well, but this isn't all we do.
We also host people, we fund artists, we advocate, we support, and we claim. We have different arms of the FAG. We have HAG, which is what we call our spare bedroom, a location for artists who are out of town or without beds. NAG, which is our arm for angry letter writing. RAG Publishing, BRAG, which is a feminist show and tell. DAG, which is our microfunder, and DRAG, a queer life drawing class for the uninitiated. We haven't done it yet, but we're going to do it. So FAG doesn't depend, like Alyssa was saying, we don't depend on formal funding sources, and we say that we'll never be tied to one government or corporate controlling purse string. We say that FAG can't be bought or sold or appropriated by institutions, and instead we're going to focus on a diverse community of individuals and artists and our collective and communal powers. So FAG is run through the volunteer time of me and Deirdre, or Deirdre and I. And as well as what we call a matronage program, where people contribute to a pool of resources that ensures that artists are always paid for exhibiting their work at the FAG or with working through us. And to find artists that we work with, we depend on the trust of the collective. And we refer to our style of curating as feral curating, or F-E-R-A-L, but we also hope that it is fair as well. And so it's not a trained curation, but it's a curating that's based on intuition, gut economies, and trust in our activist friends.
We're going to give you some examples of some of the projects. We were recently invited to the Tate Modern in London, as well as Access Gallery in Vancouver. And in both cases, instead of simply showing the work of artists we thought should be visible in a sort of traditional curatorial sense, we actually gave over the curatorial proposition to the artists themselves. So instead of telling them, we want you to show something, this is what we want it to be, we actually gave them the space, the time, the resources, and the support to do what they wanted and how they chose. So, and these aren't necessarily artists that we know, so there's an element of risk in that and trust in that. We're not just working within a closed circle of friends. At Access Gallery in Vancouver, as an example, we invited 6 emerging artists and gave them solo exhibitions. We had 7 weeks, we gave them each a week. One of the artists, Heidi Nachtigal, who you'll see in a lot of the slides, we had never met, but we had heard of her and heard of her work through our feminist and queer grapevines, and she decided to actually, instead of having a traditional show, she used her week in the gallery to open her own university, study, intentionally find mentors in the community and elsewhere, and in the end, she gave herself an MFA. That's the perfect exhibition in my mind. And in London, we were talking earlier about our friend Nazmia Jamal. She's a curator or programmer for the London Lesbian and Gay Film Festival. When we were invited to the Tate, instead of sort of assuming what artists wanted to do at the Tate, we actually contacted artists and activists there, and we asked them how they felt about the Tate. And Allyson had met Nazmia at a punk feminist squat event many years prior. And so we asked her to help us locate artists in the UK who had complicated relationships with and or who would never be on the radar of the Tate Modern. Then, with a workshop slot they gave us, which we entitled an axe grinding workshop, they were like, pardon me? Like, axe grinding.
What exactly is going to happen at the axe grinding workshop?
We took the workshop idea and we kind of unpacked it and kind of reversed it. We gave 8 artists we had 80 minutes. We gave them 10 minutes each to present their work in a cabaret style kind of studio visit to an audience of international curators. So a lot of these artists actually chose to express their discomfort with the Tate, and then they used the space to talk about what they wanted the institution to do for them. They were paid through matronage, and because of that payment, can now list their performance on their CV as a work commissioned by the Tate Modern. Now, some people need those credentials, some people don't, but at least they have the option to choose.
So similarly to these artists, and in the spirit of the axe grinding, we too channeled our anger into cultural production. We were and still are mad about how the art world works, and we believe that we have a right to be unhappy and to see that discomfort as a positive position, one that's ripe with possibilities that aren't tied to art world success, academic accomplishment, or monetary wealth. So we approach curating from an activist position, speaking in the way that Deirdre described, speaking to situations and trying to affect change. Just as feminist theory isn't simply about explaining culture, but actually about trying to change culture, feminist curating to us is an attempt to not only exhibit the work, but to change the structure through which the work is shown. So as an example of this, we began the project of FAG before we even started doing anything by inviting 70 artists, academics, arts administrators, activists, and community organizers to our house, and we asked them what they might want from a possible feminist art gallery. What would they think would be that it should be like, and what do they think that it should do? So we introduced the idea of FAG as an experiment that was communally envisioned and self-sufficient, a real tangible solution in the present tense. So it was like, let's do this now together. And we wanted our communities to feel a sense of ownership, and that was really strategic for us, that we promoted a sense of belonging from the outset. And the name FAG was landed on as a really irresistible acronym. FAG flags the fact that we are not a quote-unquote women's art gallery, but a feminist one that's equally concerned with inequities and oppression around gender as much as it is with class, race, and ability. And we believe that separatism, well, there are times and moments where it has its importance, but actually a woman's only space is a dead end, and it draws borders across people's bodies. It's just not queer for us to have a women-only space. And one of the projects that FAG initiated, and you see in slides behind us, is the name tag project. You've probably seen pictures that say the "Hello, my name is." So when you come to FAG, we ask you, and I'm sure if you haven't been there already, all of you will be coming in the near future. When you come to FAG, we will ask you to make a name tag. And first, you write your name so that we can all know who each other is and not be stressed out about remembering each other's name and getting it right. And a second name with the name of a feminist, queer, and or politicized artist, poet, rock star, friend, inspiration, mentor, matron, lover, someone you want to make visible, someone you want everyone to know about. And we call this fagging it forward. And at the end of the event, or the party, or the potluck, or the angry letter writing frenzy, or the free schooling, or the cat petting, or the backyard screening, or the directed reading, protest sign making, incantation, or herbal tea and gluten-free muffin top artist talk, we ask you to leave your name tag with FAG.
Oh, look at that.
That's our cat with the name tag on.
She chose the fast words. It's her inspiration. So stuck now to the walls of the gallery, the living room, and kitchen, and until those walls come down, your name tag helps us and all the other visitors to FAG realize how big this is and how big this could be. When you move beyond the singular, we move together beyond the individual and into the accumulative, into the collective. In an art system geared towards making a few privileged art stars in its everyday exclusions, these name tags are an exercise in subjective visibility. It's how we tell each other about the people who matter to us. It's how we build a community not restricted by money, geography, or proximity. It's how we create a feminist and queer critical mass that is ready to push against the gallery walls to make them bend further and faster. For us, a feminist space is always in process in its attempt to never be exclusionary. While we call ourselves feral curators, we are very interested in civil partnerships between feminists and queers, and partnerships with institutions with the aspirations to make institutions less institutional.
But in the first 2 years of us starting the gallery, we found ourselves in a real kind of paradoxical situation where in one sense, we wanted to avoid this institution to one degree, but then at the same time found that all of these giant institutions were really interested in working with us very, very quickly. Within a year of running the gallery, we were asked to do this thing at Tate Modern, which we can't quite believe ourselves.
That's why we keep saying Tate Modern all the time.
What?
People are like, those guys are sellouts.
I'm sick of hearing about it. So we say we can't compete with systems that we are a response to. Instead, what we try to do is create relationships. And at this point, thanks to the hard work of activists like the Guerrilla Girls and ACT UP and so on, we're well aware of the real barriers created by white male-centric nepotism. And an example of this is the Toronto International Film Festival last year listed their 100 filmmakers of all time. And on that list, there was only one woman filmmaker listed, Agnes Varda. And so we were really mad about that, and realized also that, we're not seeking a kind of liberal feminist equal status. It's not like, instead what we want to start from scratch with an experiment to engage us as much as our colleagues and community. So what we did in response to the TIFF 100 filmmakers of all time was that we screened the revolutionary film by Lizzie Borden called Born in Flames, which is about two feminist activist groups it was made in the 80s. It's about the future where the revolution has happened, but it's 10 years after the revolution. Actually, things are returning to business as usual. And it's a really important underground film that's very famous within feminist circles. So we decided to screen that in the FAG as part of the Lizzie Borden Film Festival, where we will screen the 100 essential feminist films. It may take a really long time. We're not sure. And what we did also was we collaborated with the Cinenova collection, which is a collection of feminist films that is based in the UK. So a lot of that work hasn't been seen in Canada. So we collaborated with the Power Plant and the Art Gallery of York University to be able to bring that work here. And they became matrons of FAG, and we were able to pay screening fees and pay artists to curate from that collection. And as a direct response to TIFF, not picketing outside of the Toronto International Film Festival saying we want in, but in response to their sexist list of 100 filmmakers.
You'll notice again the banners. We won't compete has become a very important part of our daily affirmations. FAG is interested in queer and feminist cultural production and curating that is unpredictable, that is proposed and presented in non-normative ways, that is disorienting, unfamiliar, asks more questions than gives answers, and in the words of Sarah Ahmed, tends towards other queer things. So you as an audience, all of you here, have tended towards us. And through this conversation that we're initiating with you now, we're tending towards you back. We can't keep up with the pace of a fake cultural economy. Instead, like with the TIFF project, we will create opportunities for artists to earn without expectation. As an example, I'm reading into Allyson's area, sorry.
I'm going to tell you about working with emerging artists as an example of this, specifically supporting emerging artists of color or racialized artists and audience. The first artist that we actually showed in the gallery proper is Alicia Lim. And they had been working for many years making very small drawings of activists within their community. And we gave them the first exhibition. They'd never had an exhibition before. Their work was mostly done through zine production. And we encouraged them to take their work and make it much larger. They made a great big mural on the wall and also created a performance element to the work. So while the exhibition was up, they every weekend they would do performance in the gallery where they would tell the stories of the activists that they had drawn in these smaller pieces. Another artist we worked with, Charlene Bamboat. At the end of that Cinenova collection, when collaborating with the Power Plant, they wanted to end with a big performance, and they wanted to select the artist. And most of the artists that they were interested in working with were from the States, and we really wanted it to be a Canadian artist, an emerging racialized Canadian artist who got to have that spotlight and got to have that recognition of having a performance that was commissioned by the Power Plant. So she performed at the Gladstone Hotel at the end. You saw a picture in there. And another artist that we've worked with, Ariel Smith, who's a young First Nations video artist living in Ottawa. And through the Access Gallery exhibition program, she was able to present her work in Vancouver's East End in a gallery at Hastings in Maine, close to where she grew up, to an audience of her peers and family. So racialized emerging artists and feminist strategies work really well together to critique the art system and mine and Deirdre's relatively privileged position within it. So we recognize the privilege that we hold, the two of us, as cisgendered white women, and the cultural capital that we have both been handed because of those privileges, as well as toiled for in 20 years of working for and volunteering in artist-run cultures. So we're both practicing artists who also work in institutions. I work as a professor at York University, and Deirdre works at VTAPE. So these jobs allow us to do things like borrow money from the bank to own property, to build a garage, to rent equipment and extend our networks. So we work with institutions in order to push against the walls, like Deirdre said, and see how flexible they can be, or how flexible we can make them. And ironically, in building we were building this thing, the Feminist Art Gallery, as a way that could take us further away from our bureaucratic jobs. We both have a lot of bureaucratic things to deal with in our jobs, and so we decided, this would be a DIY project. We could do whatever the hell we wanted, whenever we wanted, which is what we very much do. However, we're finding that it's actually decreasing, not increasing our relationship with a broader network that includes a more complex institutional terrain. When you work with larger institutions, they want things like bios, CVs, artist statements, all that kind of stuff that we're trying to run away from. But hopefully we can talk about this more in the discussion afterwards.
We should also clarify a little bit the detachment of FAG from public funding, given the struggle of Canadian artists to maintain their entitlement to public funding and financial support. As we explained, and as was mentioned, we run the gallery through microfunding. It's a matronage program, like the patronage we wish we had in Canada, but matronage. We pay artist fees through the CARFAC recommended fee schedule. And, generally that's a fee for the exhibition, as well as money for materials, travel, and we pay for an opening, and we do all of this through community support. So far, people have stepped forward to give us the funds either voluntarily or when approached. So we call ourselves privately owned, but publicly funded by public patrons. And recently we were asked if we were not for profit, and we were like, no, we're not for capitalism. Which isn't really not for profit. I'm glad you got that. So we're trying to work a system into a new system, as opposed to coming up with a whole new system. We're trying to work with the way it works, but in a way that works better for us and for artists. So, and I'll give you a good example of how we're also kind of working our own system, which is a riff on the old system. When we talked about the Tate workshop, we paid all of those artists through matronage. And I don't know, some of you may know Sarah Todd from the Western Front. She's a young curator and art writer. And she was actually involved in the Sinanova project. She had done something with the Sinanova collective in Munich. And so when she found out we were responding to TIFF by collaborating with Emma Hedich and the Sinanova folks to show some work in the gallery, she wanted to write something. The power plant agreed to publish it on their website. They paid her a fee. That fee she then donated back to FAG in order for us to pay the axe grinders a small honorarium each. So it's here that we can draw the distinction between our position on public funding in relation to FAG and our position as independent artists. Though we're looking for ways to innovate the system, we don't think that government funding should ever go away. And in fact, If we could find ways to increase it tenfold, we would. But also, before we automatically started up another arts organization dependent on public funding, we wanted to highlight how absent art patronage is in Canada and how there are so many other potential ways of working the system. We wanted people to feel invested and not just financially. We wanted people to be able to give us $50 and say, I can participate in a cultural economy from another perspective. Artists and institutions in Canada are used to asking. In fact, as Allyson mentioned, I work at VTAPE. I'm the development director there. So basically, I ask every day for money as my profession. So I know that it's fundamentally important. But what we rarely think about is how we can do it differently. And through matronage, it allows a community to participate in the creation of culture, not just the consumption of culture. So filling out grant applications and setting up a not-for-profit, ensuring grant compliance, all the things that would make us eligible for public money, just felt like it was going to focus our energies somewhere else, in fact, in the opposite place.
And like I was saying, around trying to cut the bureaucracy, my roots in DIY culture, riot girl culture, meant that I didn't want to wait for any of that. We didn't want to wait until it was like the perfect situation. We had a business plan. We had organized everything, and we actually had letterhead and a website. So the FAG is meant to cut out as much bureaucracy as possible. We have no website, we have no advertising. It's mostly word of mouth and social networking on Facebook. And we figure if the community doesn't want what we're doing, if we're no longer relevant, then they won't support it, they won't show up, and it's over, and that's fine. We think of FAG as being not necessarily a long-term project, but something that is just necessary for right now. But so far that doesn't seem to be the case. People do show up a lot to our events. And so we say we won't keep down. Instead, we will collaborate, nurture, cultivate, feed, enable. And thank you for listening to us. And we're actually really interested in hearing from you as well. What are your questions or comments about this content? There may be images that are provocative up here that you want to hear the bigger story about, and what are your big ideas on art and culture? We're interested in hearing.
What's your big ideas? We can orient you a little bit. This is some of the work that Heidi Nachtigall did when she gave herself an MFA at Access Gallery. When we have artists, we have dinners the night before the opening, and we usually ask the artist, are there people, other artists, curators, or collaborators that you would like to meet, and we invite them so that they can connect over an intimate, domestic, yet somewhat politicized engagement.
And they're giant dinner parties in the gallery. You can see that, where Deirdre and I do the catering. We make a fairly modest meal of spaghetti, salad, maybe a chocolate cake if you're lucky. And it's a way of creating an intentional community or a network for emerging artists. So, the artists we ask them who they want to meet. They may want to meet a well-known Canadian artist like Sherry Boyle or a curator at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And if we can make that happen, they're invited and they can come and meet each other.
This is Allyson S.M. Kobayashi working in the gallery/studio. So when I was talking about closing the gap between production and presentation, we don't differentiate. So we encourage the artist to work in the space as well as exhibit. This is one of the Sinanova events. I'm wearing the same shoes in that picture as I'm wearing tonight. And this as well is from the Sinanova project. What we did was we asked 8 enablers, we call them enablers, to look at the Sinanova collection and pick works and then come and present them. So you were just looking at the Vote Hard and Let's Do Democracy. That's Logan, McDonald, and
Hazel
Meyer. So these are a lot of these, that's the little fist things. A lot of the enablers chose to talk about the work, but also just talk about questions of community engagement. There's my shoes again. You can see them right there in the foreground. This is actually also, this is a project that we did with the artist Rena Katz, and we did a live broadcast from the Feminist Art Gallery.
Where they read an incantation by a Jewish feminist from the 1970s, which was a golem story about a horrible mayor, and we read it aloud where the golem gets destroyed at the end, and it was when the Rob Ford decision making was coming down, and we're hoping that if we all came together as a community and read this incantation, we could cast a spell and cast him out. It wasn't successful so far, but it looks like he continues to bury himself.
It's going to happen eventually. Even on the fourth year, after his last day in office on his fourth year, we'll be like, yes, it finally worked.
Well, isn't that? I think that's what the golem does, is it destroys itself.
Those dishes are still there as well, if anyone wants to come over. And this is the opening, I believe. And we had over 350 people come to our home. We hadn't done anything yet. We hadn't really said anything yet. So by virtue of the number of people that came, we felt, after that, we couldn't turn back. So this is Cinenova as well. You can see the 16 millimeter projector behind the, yes, God, these go by fast.
You don't have to tell them.
I know, but it's exciting.
I know.
Okay, so so I think maybe now would be a good time to open it up for questions. And I know there's going to be millions of them, so just Here we go.
Deirdre, you made reference to fake cultural economy, and I was just hoping you could expand on that a little bit.
Oh God. I don't want to dismiss it at all. It's a very important question, and I'm grateful that you asked. I'm also hesitant to get in too deep and in over my head, which is my tendency when I kind of rant and rave about the
it's
things.
Where you shine. Go for it.
It's where I shine, sure. I guess I'm feeling that much of the cultural economy that as we know it, maybe much more internationally, including the Canadian cultural economy. I feel like there's a lot of, there's a real lack of transparency, a complete lack of clarity, a lack of trust and truth, and I feel like there's a false floor and a false ceiling to both, to capture both the air that artists are supposed to live in and breathe in. And I guess I wonder how much is real and how much is set up for artists to kind of try and navigate, perhaps like a maze more than a direction. So, I think that artists can make a living in Canada. I think that artists should try to make a living in Canada. I think that public funding should be there to support them. And internationally, that is the standard. Most progressive and contemporary countries have art scenes that are full of artists that are supported in some way by public funding. But I guess what bothers me is the way that museums and galleries work generally. And it's that cultural economy that I'm most critical of. So, when we think of the National Gallery and we think of what it's supposed to do or what it could possibly do for Canadian artists, and then we look at what it actually does, it's in there that I feel like there's a little bit too much slippage for my liking. I feel like there's a lot of promise and not a lot of delivery in the Canadian museum and public gallery system. So where artists should be visible, they're invisible. And in particular, most of the really interesting artists, the artists of color, queer and feminist artists, women, most of them are not visible in the dominant cultural economy. So I feel like we need to be highly aware of what really is there for us. And if it's not serving the function of supporting Canadian artists, then I wonder what in fact it actually does. So that's where that comes from.
And and some of this stuff is grounded in however you hold weight in statistics that were calculated by the Canada Council themselves, as well as the Art Gallery of York University on more of an activist research project on that working wage research that Michael Miranda did, that found that if you break down who gets solo exhibitions, who gets catalogs, who gets other kinds of benchmarks, whose work gets collected, not just small works on paper, but large room size installation. There's a lot of, this, it's unfair. It's unequal.
Yes, perhaps it's more flawed than fake. Maybe that's...
Sorry?
Perhaps it's more just flawed than it is fake.
What really strikes me about what I've seen presented is a feeling of freedom, a feeling of no boundaries between artist and community, where community and artists and the other people involved, like curators and so on, are kind of mixed up like paint, so that the art is kind of rubbed off on the people. It's just fabulous.
Well, part of it is this experiment that Deirdre and I have been living intimately in for the last 2 years, that it's our home, it's our house. There's people in our house almost every week. Right now we're running a reading group that's happening, so I don't even have a key to the front door of the gallery anymore. We've given out so many keys to other people. And it's almost an anarchist method of personal property ownership. It's an attempt to kind of break the neoliberal agenda around individualism and personal property, is that if we are going to have these kinds of privileges, we want it to be open. And there's been times during this experiment over the past 2 years where we find maybe we're reaching our edge of where we can't take this anymore, that our lives are too public, our home is too open. But every time we do that, we kind of, some other interesting project or amazing thing happens that it tells us we're doing the right thing, even though we're exhausted or kind of scared or a little bit freaked out. I think that we're pretty excited about keeping on doing it.
I think so. Also, just that idea of how community comes together. I mean, I think that is how culture works, and I think that there is that when we find ourselves kind of at what we feel like is our maximum, usually that's when we just go ahead and keep going, and that's the thing that I think people don't do very much, and what might be it might be the thing that attracts people to the Feminist Art Gallery, is that it doesn't really have the boundaries that it should. That it kind of misbehaves in and of itself, and people come together under that umbrella and meet each other to create culture. That they work together to create the culture. It's not a system or a parameter or a boundary or a box. It's really about connectivity, I guess.
I thought that was a really great comment about how the art and the community are coming together, and I think maybe one of the reasons it's happening is because it is in this domestic space within a neighborhood where there's not a lot of other art galleries nearby. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the neighborhood has influenced that.
Well, and this is interesting too, because it's one place where I think gentrification of a neighborhood has actually worked for us. Because when we did this, when we renovated the garage, we got a proper building permit. There were limitations on what we could do because we knew we were politically on the edge, calling ourselves fag, two weirdo lesbian artists wanting to do this thing. So we did everything by the book in terms of actually building and bylaws and things like that. But in Toronto, you're not supposed to do something in your garage besides really park your bike, park your car there. But a lot of people, of course, do lots of other things, like
We have a car.
like make wine, or have their jigsaw out there. But really, what you're supposed to do is have a garage. And where your neighbors can start complaining is if you do things beyond that. And our house has a bit of a history where a couple of owners before us, the guy who owned it, ran into some financial problems and was living in the garage, which was a shack before we built that space. And got into maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but got into an altercation with another neighbor where he complained that the neighbor wasn't shoveling his snow. And so the neighbor called the bylaw officers on him, saying he was living in his garage, so that he had to end up actually selling the house. But anyway, we opened the space, and we didn't really have any problems with any of our neighbors. Our house is on an alleyway, so people can come to a side gate to get into the garage, and it actually opens into 2 different alleys. But we had one neighbor out of many, many, many who see us who hated our guts. And she did everything she could to torment us, as well as torment the bylaw officer, who we became really familiar with, and we knew him well. He came over many times. And in the end, he said, because we tried to kind of hide what we were doing, and we called it a workshop and all this kind of stuff. And then it came down to it. He said, just tell me what you're doing, and we'll try to make it work. And we said, we are running a feminist art gallery. It's in our house, it's in the garage, it's in the backyard. It exceeds the space of our domestic house, but we're not going to stop doing this. And
We basically gave him this paper.
And he emailed us back and said that actually I was able to go to my supervisor with saying that you're running an art gallery, and you live in this one particular ward that community activists fought for when Parkdale started getting gentrified to the degree that it's gentrified. Active 18, which was a community group, worked to have that neighborhood be counted as, because it's going to be an art gallery district, that anybody can open an art gallery in any space. It wasn't just restricted to commercial spaces. So anybody in this Parkdale neighborhood can have a public museum or gallery in any space. So we now can have like a giant neon sign on our roof. And our neighbor
Might be a bit much.
And our neighbor can kiss it. We can do whatever we want. But besides this one aggressive neighbor, maybe you want to talk about some of the more positive neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, when we have large groups of people come to openings, it's actually one of the streets like most exciting days. People, I mean, elderly people that are in all winter come to the spring openings, and they're like, oh my God, all these beautiful young people, what's going on? They get right in there. Ian across, this is the original garage.
Yeah.
Ian across the way opens up his garage door, pulls out the barbecue, starts cooking food.
He wants to sell roti.
He wants to sell roti in the next opening. That's too commercial. But it really doesn't have the boundaries that museums in designated parts of urban downtowns have, or galleries, even in that sort of like back alley kind of way. It's situated in a very old and very established, very diverse, and often very politicized community in Toronto. So the way that people approach it is like they would approach any event in their neighborhood, and I think that makes it very different in terms of the population of the public engagement, who's allowed into the art project is a very different proposition when you work in Parkdale.
And we live on we live on Seaforth Avenue, which is the main line, if you know Parkdale at all, for people in that neighborhood to Dr. Brock and the other Dr. Brock, which is the liquor store and the beer store that are right, like within spitting distance from our house. So there's tons of traffic that goes by there, and lots of those people find their way to the gallery as well.
Looking for community.
When you were talking about
sometimes it gets a little bit scary, like giving people the keys and maybe not knowing what's going to happen with your neighbors in the bylaw, or even having the name fed, is the element of risk and entering into an unknown territory somewhere where you want to position the gallery in that you are taking big challenges that are potentially could put you in some sort of
Disaster.
yes.
Yes. Yeah, well, we both are really interested in pushing it, both in our own art and in this project, which has become really largely both of our art practices as well. That, I mean, my dad is always terrified that someone's going to turn their ankle in the backyard and sue us, or, you know, and say, you know, that kind of stuff can happen. I'm not scared about people having keys to our house, because I actually really do believe that all those people who have keys to our house, they're not going to do, what are they going to do? Come and like look in my drawers? I don't really have anything to hide. It's more that I get afraid sometimes of burnout, or getting, you know, when the perversion and psychoanalysis reading group is there again this Friday night from 5 till 8, and it's like I really,
And we didn't do the readings, which
no, again we could not get to the readings, and actually
we're really afraid of
and actually I would much
those people.
and actually I would much rather on a Friday after working hard all week sit in my underwear and watch Sopranos reruns on TV.
It's enough.
That, you know.
Don't tell them that.
But, you know, that's the kind of the scariness of, like, I don't know how much I can take. I don't know how much more I can ingest, but we're really into pushing it.
I would like to add, though, that I think that everybody weighs and measures risk in their lives and in their families and in their occupations, and I would think that, and I think that artists and I think that organizations, maybe Musageti's is an example, or, you know, V-Tape's an example, or Ed Video's an example, or CAFTA's an example. I feel like somebody has to take these risks, and I feel like artists are well positioned to take the risk, and that taking the risk is a lot less scary when you're doing it in a collective or communal sense. So, like when the bylaw officer was coming to our house, we also had all these other people coming to our house. So there's a kind of a balance is created, or risk is managed over these other through these other trajectories and other momentums. But again, I feel like, and so I think we are taking certain risks that artists don't typically take, like letting strangers into our home. But I also think that as artists, we are prepared to take certain risks, and we'll take greater risks to communicate the importance and the urgency that we feel around what's missing in the Canadian cultural ecology. And so if we don't take the risks, and if we don't all take some risk, there will be no such thing as political or politically oriented work. There is no such thing as feminism. Because, you know, if your work can't challenge systems of oppression, then what is your work for? You know, I feel very strongly that the risks that we're taking, you know, that we have to look on Facebook to find our house key, is one of the least risky things. The most risky is drawing a distinction between what is happening and saying we don't like that, and proposing what we think should be happening. Because in that, not only are you risking your own career as an artist, I mean, we're already unpopular enough as it is, never mind being openly critical. And that letter to Tiff was not a kind letter. And it was going to colleagues and friends and people that we had worked with for 20 years. And we were like, you guys are fucking this up. So when you say that, that's when, you know, certainly on an individual level as an artist, you're risking everything. Because no one likes to be pointed to as someone who's failing the community.
Well, it's a classic situation of power that you're not supposed to be critical of those in power, because then you may never get to have the same kind of power. That's how hegemony works.
Well, and as you move up the art ladder, you're supposed to become more better behaved, and more assimilated and more culturally relevant, and so more part of the structure. So when you step out of that, you take a lot of personal risk, professional risk. But it's also, I feel like the art community, the art public and the community of artists in Canada, if we don't begin to do that collectively, to become more critical and to put some of the more political work forward, we risk losing our voice completely. And that we do, and so we do what we do actually towards greater risk, not lesser. Maybe.
Who are you?
But no, it is part of how artist-run culture came to be. I mean, the artist-run system in Canada was built as an alternative. So, historically and across Canada, and in particular in Vancouver with organizations like the Western Front, artists bought buildings and did the same thing. They opened the doors and brought in the misfits and the feminists and the queers and the radicals and the politicos and the people who were actually engaged in creative and intellectual exercises that took a look at social justice, took a look at poverty, took a look at equity, took a look at race, took a look at class, did all those things that we believe our institutions in Canada should do more of.
Yes. This is a business question. Okay. Can you tell me the business side of how the matronage works?
We have a bank account. We just went online, and for $60 you can you can register a business, and you take a registration number to the bank. So one of the really important parts of the monetary element is that we never want people to write us a personal check, and every time we pay artists, we pay them with feminist money that's been charged through a feminist system. So we have a bank account. We have a business, the Feminist Art Gallery. I am the sole proprietor, because you can't have two because it costs twice as much. So, and so we have a checkbook, Feminist Art Gallery checkbook. So generally people, there's two important parts. One is people will either just approach us and say, I like what you're doing, and we'll explain to them how it works and ensure them that all of their contribution will go to paying an artist in some way, shape, or form, and or an intern in some way, shape, or form. People come to us and they want to help us do things, but instead of volunteering, we give them an honorarium for the work that they do. So it's either artist fees or towards an exhibition or internships. And sometimes we solicit, like if an artist is going to be in the gallery, or if we're doing something, say in Vancouver, we'll solicit people that we know to support the project. Sometimes it's an ex-professor of somebody, or sometimes, it's a network of queer folks that all kind of know each other in a city. So we'll solicit and spread the word if we feel we need resources towards an exhibition. The other important element is that we don't actually allow for a hierarchy to be created. So people that give us more money don't get more privileges than those who give us less. And in fact, we could have maybe 12 matrons or 6 matrons to an exhibition, and we will identify them, and they will never know what the other gave. They are all equal. So it could be 500 from one person and 50 from another. So we try to erase that, making it anonymous to some extent in terms of the monetary amount, but then putting them all in the same group and saying, you guys all did this together, and we put them with the artist and they do what they do. So the two principles I think work well. One is that the money is never ours, and that the matrons are always equal.
And it's happened pretty organically so far. We haven't had to do a lot of fundraising.
We do chip in a lot of our own resources, and when we talked about the privileges before, it's through those privileges that we're able to do that, obviously. We don't ever expect not to do that, but that's our choice.
So there's a little bit of our own spaghetti sauce thrown in.
Oh yeah, lots of.
This was great. Thank you so much for coming. We kind of fell in love with them in January when they came to our board and staff retreat, and they gave a version of this talk, and it really inspired a lot me spaghettis as well, and the ways in which we are thinking politically and about how to engage the community. And I felt also like for this kind of intimate feel in the space, your talk was great as the first one in the 2013 series. So this is wonderful. A couple things though. Would you tell people how they can get into the network? Like
Yeah.
with Facebook, what's your Facebook?
Well, if you go to Facebook and search Feminist Art Gallery, you will be able to find us. If you can't find us through that way, if you look for Allyson Mitchell, you'll be able to see the Feminist Art Gallery on my likes page. And if you don't use Facebook, we do not judge you. You can give us your email and we'll put you on our email list. I'll leave a piece of paper right here that says email. So we also email people about our actual, and we don't send tons of emails. It's just for the exhibitions in Toronto.
And if you'd like to be a matron, you can give them some cash or checks.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
I would never. Oh my God. Give them to Sean.
Facebook also has their mailing address.
That's awesome.
That's
great.
Right?
That's
yeah,
great.
come and see us.
Yeah.
And like they said, we are planning to do something more with Allyson and Deirdre in the form of a workshop at some point. We were hoping to try to coordinate around this, but since you're just up the road, there's no urgency to make it happen in conjunction with the lecture. So thank you all very much for coming, and I'm glad to hear that you're also invigorated by the talk. I think it's brilliant. And there is still more food and wine, I think, in the lobby.
There's
There's juice.
Juice.
Sorry, it's all gone.
No, it's gonna
But you don't have to rush out. Hang around, and you can talk some more with Allyson and Deirdre.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah.
That was great.